G'day golfers. Ever found yourself redirecting blame and making excuses after having an absolute shocker on a golf course? I know that I have. Range was closed, I was a little cold, didn't warm up, I hit it in those 3 old divots. Then we have the podcast for you. We focus on how to fundamentally own your swing. Strike it pure and consistently shoot in the 70s. Be it if you're a weekend hack, retired and playing daily, a school phenom or a tour professional. We present and discuss facts and physics pertaining to golf, trying to keep our ego and opinion at bay. We dispel myths such as keep your head down, bend your knees, or my all-time favourite, game improvement irons. So stop drinking that mythical Kool-Aid and have a sip of ours. I think you'll find it both inspiring and refreshing. I'm Scott Young, founder of Swing, PGA professional and ex-tour player. Welcome to Pivot the Path. G'day golfers, and welcome to Pivot the Path following an epic Ryder Cup. Professional sport, the elite moments in professional sport are like nothing else we know. Whether it's science marvels, landing on the moon, when you hear someone cures cancer, when you get married, when you have your kids born. What we need to fuel our day-to-day is just occurrences that spark and ignite our passion to be better. And I thought this past weekend's Ryder Cup was nothing short of absolutely unbelievable. So Pivot the Path this morning is specifically about the Ryder Cup. There was no other golf. It was the juggernaut of our golfing experience. From the players themselves, it was the highest golf tournament they play anywhere in any time of their career, which to me was interesting compared to the 4 majors. Improvement pivot point, it's whatever hurdle you are facing, whether it's a golf hurdle, whether it's a life hurdle, whether it's a work hurdle, you never, ever, ever give up. And my hat is off to the US team today. Obviously this week, they're bitterly disappointed that they lost their home Ryder Cup. However, the fight and the tenacity and the guts they showed was nothing short of absolutely phenomenal. So let's get into it. It was the 45th Ryder Cup. They've been playing since 1927 and only 4 times had an away Europe side, so that is when the Europe side come to America, had they won. And so to do that in the 5th occurrence is nothing short of unbelievable, especially because it was such a juggernaut of a golf course, Bethpage. And I wanted to parallel that to how we've set up Swing and how as an Aussie, obviously I'm a US citizen now, but as an Aussie, I'm kind of caught in the middle of who do I barrack for, because growing up as a Ryder Cup, because I had basically never been to the US, I always grew up siding with the Europeans. My main tournament that I love watching was the British Open. The Masters was obviously a fairy tale. But to me, as an Australian, I've always had a bit of an impartial look at the Ryder Cup. And it was absolutely unbelievable. So I wanted to go on a little tangent, as I do here occasionally, and just explain the fuel that led my wife and I to kind of dig our heels in and make the golf game better for the masses. Our job is to improve the game of golf, to share the game of golf, and to make sure that everyone who comes in contact with us, whether it's online or in here or buys our clubs or has lessons or has our physical therapy, is better from our experience than when they first made first contact. And so, without being too dramatic, because the Ryder Cup, the lead up to the Ryder Cup, there was so much drama and noise, and I just couldn't wait for the tournament to start. But I really parallel this to the ANZAC spirit. And what is the ANZAC spirit? Well, it's how I've been defined as a person. I think the school I went to, shout out all the old Knox boys, the school I went to certainly defined the first 10, 12 years of my life. But the ANZAC spirit was the Australian and New Zealand service men and women who basically were founded as an identity in Gallipoli in 1915. So basically what happened, the British hierarchy and British troops landed the Australian and New Zealand largely troops in Gallipoli, on Gallipoli Beach, about 1 mile, 2 miles where they were meant to land. And so they were meant to land on beaches and storm towards what was then called Constantinople, which we know now as Istanbul. And unfortunately, they land in the wrong spot. They faced cliffs. And then for 8 months, 250,000 troops were massacred. And the evacuation of Gallipoli is legendary. They had over 90,000 troops leave the beach without a casualty. And if I basically think of the ANZAC spirit, it was their doggedness, their courage, their endurance, their initiative, and more than anything, it was their mateship to get a job done. And so whilst this attack on Constantinople was fought with mistake after mistake, it was the fact that this ANZAC spirit came together. They pivot the path. They realized that this battlefront was unnegotiable. And so they designed a plan where they had their rifles with cups of water or tins of water, which had different holes in them, which would let the water out, which would drop down and fire the pin at different times. And so over a period of a few days, they basically left the beach, 90,000 troops, without hardly a casualty. And the initiative and the ingenuity shown to get all those people off that beach basically shaped our young country, because our young country is only a couple of decades old. Why do I backpedal? Well, the fought and fight that I saw in the US team in this Ryder Cup was absolutely unbelievable. The fight and the preparation of the Europe side on Friday and Saturday was exemplary. It was nothing short of a miracle. And so we had this professional sport event that I think is one of the best sport events I've probably ever seen. And for an Australian looking outward at our community in here, the community in Swing, the community around Midtown, the city was abuzz. We had the UN, and it was just an amazing weekend of golf. And I just wanted to say thank you to the players. And for those 25 and a couple of captains and vice captains and their team, they gave us a snapshot of why we love sport. And sport is an occurrence where we can draw upon that strength and courage and initiative and mateship. And the mateship shown from the Europe side on Friday and Saturday, and then leveled and paralleled with the mateship shown on Sunday. So why do we watch professional sport? Like landing on the moon, like when your kids are born, like when you propose to the love of your life. It's a moment in time that creates a core memory. And as we get older, our core memories get less and less. Where those times are that you really look back on. I'm going to look back on this Ryder Cup on certain moments, and I'm going to look back on this Ryder Cup as just nothing short of outstanding individual heroism in the moment of pure emotional distress, and to take themselves from or out of this distress and just battle like warriors was unbelievable. And I don't want to overstate, I think it was probably one of the best sporting events that I watched on TV ever. It was outstanding. So let's get into it. The preparation of Luke Donald and the European side took 3 years. And so I think my overriding memory of this Ryder Cup was just the US were out prepared. Europe had prepared this based on stats and math and statistics. And in listening to the lead up, it was quite interesting. I thought the commentary for the whole weekend was nothing short of appalling. It was just so dramatic. And until Faldo got on, I love listening to Sinek because he's very black and white. And look, I know they've got to fill in hours and hours of telecast, but they've got to do something with the broadcast. I thought it was just so emotional and so dramatic. But Paul Ginley said one thing, and Paul Ginley was the Ryder Cup captain and holed a putt to win the Ryder Cup back in his day. And he said a very interesting thing on Friday. After the Europeans came out like a guns blazing, he let slip that they knew that with a 2-up lead after 6 to 7 holes, there's an 86% chance of winning that certain match. And he said, it's what we've done, and we've prepared stats. And stats win matches, and matches win Ryder Cups, and Ryder Cups, it doesn't matter whether it's home or away, shape golf industry. And so McGinley let that drop, even though the Chamblays of the world and all the other commentators had asked Paul, let us in, let us know what Europe have been preparing. He was a stone wall and he was part of the preparation team. And they had obviously done their homework meticulously on stats. And what I'd love to do is bring all the Ryder Cup back to swing and what we do here on Pivot the Path, is that we are a platform that's high and tight on golf improvement. We get rid of all the bullshit. And what McGinley just let us in on Friday was that they had approached this entire Ryder Cup based on stats and math. Why? Because they're objective, they don't lie, and they produce results. Every time someone comes through our front door, I strive on having them improve when they leave. And so what I loved about this Ryder Cup was that the Europeans just approached it very differently. They had approached it and they'd obviously done incredible statistics on what they needed to do to present a team front to get their players to win events. And we always knew the US would be very strong with the individuals, but it was the team event where they really set the tone. And I'm going to jump around here a little bit because there's so much to do, but the stats that they had proved for the team players to win was nothing short of absolutely on point. And so I took from that the strongest lead-in for the European side was that 11 players of the 12 were returning from the preceding Ryder Cup back in Rome. So that made a pretty strong platform. There were snippets of commentary that I really found fascinating. Obviously, McGinley's comment on 85% winning chance if you're 2 up through 6. Again, what did that mean? Europe came out fighting for those first 6 holes. What I loved was when Nick Faldo said, guys, this is a game of numbers. And they had to go back into the 50s and 60s to find the great Arnold Palmer, who led the US's team event where they had 5 or 6 wins. And so if you're in a US team drawing back to the days of Arnold Palmer to find your most successful team, we know that Friday and Saturday is going to be hard for the US team. And this is where I'd love to comment on what that means to me. I mean, in my opinion, Keegan did a phenomenal job. Golfers win Ryder Cups, not team captains. Now, in one breath, Luke Donald obviously presented a team front and stats, and we'll get into a couple of the snippets that I think Luke Donald, I'm kind of saying 2 things here. In one breath, I'm saying Luke Donald presented a platform and a solution, but the players still had to go out and execute. And I hope that Keegan doesn't get hammered here, because at the end of the day, the players of the US team on Friday and Saturday didn't execute. So again, I hope that the media and all the pundits, and 99% of them have never put their balls on the chopping block to give it a go. I hope that Keegan doesn't get, raked over the coals here, because I think there's a cultural difference whereupon the US have always, and until their culture changes, which I can't see it, will always struggle on Friday and Saturday. It's a cultural difference in the golf landscape. And let me explain that, because that's a pretty big comment. Here in the US, you play your golf in your high school, and then you've got all these juggernaut of golf colleges or universities with golf teams trying to create the best golf team they can. Now, a golf team in the US, let's go Division 1, because most Division 1 golfers will then go on to PGA Tour, or have the chance to anyway. Most golf teams will have somewhere conservatively between, say, 8 and 10 to 12 players. I know there's a specific number. I don't know what that is, so don't wiki quote me on that. Let's say they have 10 players. Of those 10 players, only 5 usually get to play. And so the entire culture of a US existence in college golf is, whilst you are a team, it's to beat your fellow teammate, because you are fighting, unless you're the outlier, the one percenter, you are fighting for that team spot. And so the entire, in my opinion, college golf existence is based on competitiveness. And that's why the PGA Tour is so strong, because you've got these 18-year-old young men and women, and LPGA, you have these 18-year-old men and women who are still forming as adults, but they have to fight to get on their playing side, to play on the weekend, to get the sponsors, to get the equipment, to get the accolades, to get the media interviews, and it snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. And so the very existence, in my opinion, of college golf is competitiveness. And your competitiveness isn't only with the opposing team, it's with your teammates. And so by the time you get on LPGA or PGA Tour, you are ferociously competitive, be it with the team, the opposing team, but also your teammates. And so we only have to look at two of the greatest players. In my opinion, there's three. Nicklaus, who holds the major record, Scheffler and Tiger Woods, and Scheffler and Tiger, whom had a very, very ordinary Ryder Cup record. Obviously, Scheffler's still going. Why does Scheffler have such a poor record? Because, and we said this leading up to the Ryder Cup, he's an amazing golfer. In my opinion, the best. He could become the best player of all time. But he does it his way, and he has his processes, and he has his beliefs, and he warms up his own way, and he sleeps his own way, and he has his team his own way. And the problem we've got with the Ryder Cup from a US point of view is it is a team-focused event. And the exact culture, what makes the US Tour so dominant, and the US Tour players so much more dominant than any other player in the world, is because they are ferociously competitive, both with the opposing team growing up at college golf, but also with one another. And so if the US Ryder Cup group, whoever that is, whoever's pulling the strings, they have to work out whether they want to change, in my opinion, they want to change the culture that makes the US Tour the juggernaut, the very thing that makes the US Tour the absolutely epitome, in my opinion, of professional golf, is the very thing that's going to undermine Friday and Saturday. It's the very reason Faldo so poignantly said on Sunday or Saturday morning, hey, I've got to go back to Arnold Palmer to find the most winning Ryder Cup US team members. That's 50 or 60 years ago. That's insane. So the Friday and Saturday, the teams event, is always going to make the US seem a little weaker than what they are. It's just because culturally, the European side are a European united front. And so what Luke Donald was, he created an invincible united front. It was more about the tenaciousness and the team camaraderie of those 12, 13, 14 players, including vice captains and captains, than it was of the individual. As we always say, the sum is greater than the individual. But on US Tour, like Scotty Scheffler, the individual is greater than the sum. And so for the next decade or so, it's going to be a fascinating Ryder Cup, because this week highlighted how strong the US team are in their individual matches, but how susceptible and vulnerable they are in their team matches. And I can't see that changing overnight. It's the essence of what makes the US Tour so strong is the individual player, but it means that that same individual player finds it hard to group in and pair in. And so when you've got these unbelievably strong personalities like Koepka and Scheffler and Bryson DeChambeau, they're hard guys to match and to make a strong team. And so the US, whoever's making those decisions, has to kind of take a step back and go, right, what did Luke Donald do so well? Was it the fact that under the Ryder Cup logo, he had a picture of Seve, I was told. And so they were playing for something that was greater than them. And everything that the Ryder Cup and the Europeans did in this weekend's Ryder Cup was that the team is stronger than the individual. Our time, our place. And I thought that our time, our place was very poignant and very, very strong. Okay, so let's have some little points that I took away. Team Donald, Luke Donald. The fact that he had VR headsets preparing his players for the raucousness of the crowd. And if we pivot just a little bit, I thought the crowd was largely pretty good, but there are a couple of individuals that were appalling. The PGA of America have to do a better job. It's not up to the players to single out someone threw a drink at Rory's wife. Now, Rory's brought a lot of things on himself. I think he said a lot of stupid things with the live over the last 4 years. But when someone throws a drink at anyone, let alone one of the players' wives, that is nothing short of appalling. And I was so proud of Shane Lowry, who was like a big brother for Rory. But when the PGA of America and the DP Tour are making $100 million in profit, then sure as shit they can get all the PGA head pros and the assistant pros, they can put on a certain uniform and they can be the ones policing it. It shouldn't be up to the local law enforcement to say, hey, he's thrown a drink. The obscenities yelled at Rory was nothing short of disgusting, because I asked a lot of our members in here who went, and they said it was only a small majority, but they certainly ruined it. So for the gallery, next Ryder Cup, let's just police that a little better. But getting back to Luke Donald, who did a phenomenal job with those VR sets, so he could prepare his players for the onslaught of the abuse that was held to them, which again, I think should be curbed, but look, it's part of sport. I do get it. To have Luke Donald prepare his recovery room, when they showed us into the recovery room, we have cold plunge in here. We've just put it in. It's very important for our recovery, for our swing community. They had cold plunge. They had infrared sauna. They had gyms. They had masseuse. They had physios, but in a team environment, which gets back to the Scotty Scheffler. I hope that they don't hammer Scotty, because the very reason, in my opinion, he may become one of the greatest of all time. In my opinion, he's currently the third greatest player of all time on any tour in anywhere in the world. But he is an individual. And what I think Luke appeared to do better than the US was make it about the team. You could just see the team camaraderie was absolutely bulletproof. So shout out to Luke Donald. You deserve to win. Why? Because you prepared more ferociously as a team, and you prepared based on objective math, which is what my entire business is on. Math doesn't lie and stats don't lie. It's why I always want people, when they come into swing, first objective, face less than path. Face has to be open to target, but less than the path to control ball flight, whatever club you're trying to hit. And so if we take that use of stats and objectivity out, Luke Donald, hats off to you. To Keegan Bradley, mate, you're amazing. I thought the way you handled yourself throughout the weekend for a pretty young guy, and with a barrage of abuse of, the Morikawa pairing was appalling because it ranked 130 on stats. Look, if candy and nuts were soup and nuts, then Christmas would be every day of the week. Everyone has an opinion, and it's not until you put yourself in the same position as someone trying to make it better that you have the right to be so malicious. And so I admire Keegan. I thought his press conference on Friday night was fantastic. When a few of the reporters tried to twist his words and blame Keegan, he was very poignant and he was very elegant and he was extremely graceful to say, hey, I didn't say that. You're trying to take my words out of context. Let's just keep this high and tight on the facts. And so, Keegan, good on you. One of the points I loved about Keegan was to get Larry Nelson, who up until that point had basically the best Ryder Cup record, but had never been a captain, to fly Larry up from Georgia, he and his wife, and to make it a beautiful moment for Larry and to embrace the epitome of what Larry represented as a Vietnam vet. He'd hardly played any golf. He went on to win 2 majors and had one of the best Ryder Cup records ever. To get him back to the team, I think was the right tone. I just don't believe it was done enough. As I said, from Luke Donald putting Sevy's face inside the embroidery of the Ryder Cup, just all the little things to make the team greater than the individual. I think that's what the US have to do better if they're going to try and win this. Okay, so to individual performances. I mean, wow, where do we start? Justin Rose, Tommy Fleetwood, Russell Henley for the US is a bit of an unsung hero. Cam Young, amazing, and Bryson's back nine on Sunday was nothing short. Those 4 or 5 was nothing short of one of the greatest performances I've seen. The Europeans' Friday and Saturday team performance, Justin Rose was unbelievable. He and Fleetwood, and the way Shane Lowry protected Rory because of, what Rory's created the last couple of years. Those guys, they're moments that stood out to me. Justin Rose's ability to hold putts, never give up, his doggedness was unbelievable. Tommy Fleetwood, unwavered. Russell Henley, a guy I didn't know a lot about, and kind of a lot of the Muppets, the commentary kind of questioned how well he would play. He played amazing golf on Sunday to keep that event alive. Tommy Fleetwood, just a rock-solid human being. Bryson's drive on Sunday, when he was the first group off, the US were clearly never going to win, but then about 5 o'clock on Sunday evening, I tell you what, they nearly bloody won. It went from all blue at 12:30 in the afternoon to half blue, half red at about 2 o'clock to all red at about 4:30. And at about 4:30, the crowd were like, oh my God, America could win this. For Bryson nearly knocking it on 1, and then to come back after being 5 down, I just thought was why I love playing golf. Which leads me to an interesting point, and I was talking about this to a couple of our guys I was watching this with on Sunday night. As a guy who prides himself on pre-shot routine, mental tenacity, I'm helping a lot of our now younger guys who potentially wanting to go pro with a lot of their mental game. And so I've devised this way to actually mathematically calculate how mentally strong you are for any given round, which is really powerful. And if you're interested, pop us an email. One would argue that Bryson, or I believe Bryson, is too intense. And the way and the imagination and the effortless flow that we see Bryson play when he's breaking 50 on his YouTube channel, in my opinion, is what he should bring to his tournament golf. A little lighter tone, a little more energetic, a little calmer. And the Bryson that we saw on the Ryder Cup was this Superman, Cape Crusader, I'm going to run through a brick wall. And until Sunday, I would have said that it didn't serve him and didn't bring out the best of his golf. But then he plays on Sunday with the same, my old sports psych, John Novak, used to say, cup the water, just be present and be calm. Whereas the Friday, Saturday, Sunday of Bryson is, I'm going to run through a brick wall. And I would have thought that wouldn't have served him until he performed on Sunday with amazing, amazing results. And so it'd be interesting to me to sit with Bryson and ask him, can you, A, understand the difference between Bryson breaking 50 and obviously Ryder Cup, which clearly he can, he's a smart guy. And why does he keep choosing to be so forceful and and he wants to squeeze the result? I would love to see him take to a major, a little more of a breaking 50 Bryson, and that would be interesting. On that whole mental tenaciousness, I thought the use of whoop was unbelievable. I loved that. But again, I thought the producers could have done so much more. They used JT a lot on his whoop. Obviously, he's been using whoop for, I think JT's one of the guys who's been using whoop the most. They had JT about to walk into one of his putts, and his resting heart rate, now think about this, he may have walked up a slight hill. My resting heart rate, I'm pretty fit, I think it's around 60, high 50s. So one would imagine that JT's resting heart rate is around, watching TV, is around about, let's call it 60. He had a resting heart rate when he was about to have a putt, so before he started his pre-shot routine, at about 120 beats per minute. That's insane. As he's approaching his birdie putt, I think it was on the 8th hole or the 9th hole, his resting heart rate on the singles match on Sunday shot up to 128. He's now got his putter in hand. Actually, it was the 7th hole because he went to play the 8th. His resting heart rate then went up to 138. Now, he's doing no exercise. He's doing no aerobic exercise, but his resting heart rate is pumping at 138. He then holds a putt. His resting heart rate goes up to 139. Unbelievable. Now, that's where they took the whoop off. But what I would love them to do was then to track, and this is what I think Ryder Cup have done better than most, then track how does JT get a resting heart rate of 138, and this gets back to Scotty Scheffler. How do we get him back down to whatever his optimal heart rate is? My gut feeling is his resting heart rate for optimum performance has to be around 80, 85. And so what I would have loved the producers to do was let us into the data and say, right, you're at 138, you've holed a putt, you've body slammed whomever was around, he's doing the ear thing, his blood pressure's going through the roof, but that's not going to serve him to execute on delicate shots or hitting a little fade or hitting a bolo hook. He's got to bring that down. And the epitome of professional golf is to control your emotions, which is why Scheffler in golf tournaments is unbelievable, because he's got that flat line. And I would have loved to have seen, you're at 138, how long does it take to get you down to 80? And then, right, that event's happened, it's gone, put it in the past, how do I get back to where I need to be? So I think the whoop, they did a half-assed job. It would have been great to kind of get on with that. Which leads me to my favourite moment, which was Rosie holing that putt in the 4-ball. He's got about a 15-footer up the hill, halfway in, he's walking, ball's in the hole, and I just thought the whole thing was phenomenal. What was my only negative for the Ryder Cup? I thought the TV commercials and the broadcast was nothing short of appalling. The amount of drug ads for a sporting event where young kids, let's call them below 16, 17, were watching was disgusting. So for the powers that be, the PGA of America, you need to kick up the arse. For a sporting event that's one of the biggest on the globe, there shouldn't be so many drug ads on. In fact, there shouldn't be commercials. You're $100 million for a non-profit organization. Why don't you put that revenue into making it ad-free like the Masters? You know, for $19 for a drink out there, for a beer, and whilst the drinks and sandwiches were free, it was also $1,000 for a Ryder Cup event. So I think they've got to distribute the revenue a little more, and for Christ's sake, cut the commercials out. Finishing with our improvement pivot point, you never, ever, ever give up. Whether it's a small business, whether it's playing an event, whether it's an NFL event, whether it's your local lacrosse game, our improvement point, tying it right back to the Ryder Cup, was you never give up. You are never, ever out of the fight. So as the weeks come in, and if you come across a hurdle, whether it's your local round of golf with a mate, whether it's a competitive game, whether it's your lacrosse match, whether it's my daughter rowing at the head of the Charles, whatever it is, you never, ever give up. And I thought that US side on Sunday was one of the greatest sporting events ever. And for the Europeans to dig in, for Aberg to dig in and get that point, I just can't say enough about the Ryder Cup and the guys playing. Thank you for an amazing weekend of sport. I hope the US just changed their tone a little bit on the Friday and Saturday. I hope Luke Donald prepares for another 3-year battle as he leads into the next Ryder Cup. I want him to come back as Ryder Cup captain. And remember, you can absolutely own your swing with the work you put into your game off the golf course. And in our opinion, you never, ever, ever give up. You are always in the fight. What do we believe? You can own your swing. Beauty golfers, thanks for listening. Remember, share the podcast and the newsletter, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Cheers.